So, Ben, you had the initial idea to write a blog post or longer form guide, I guess, on this particular topic. Why did you think it was important to chat about?
SEO, I don't really think gets the flowers it deserves necessarily from a performance angle.
No, you're right.
There might be some reasons for that. I'll get into it in a little bit more detail. But yeah, for me, I think it's a little bit of a missed opportunity for brands, particularly ones who are looking to break into the UK market or sort of startups. But for any e-commerce or any sort of digital marketing strategy, I think SEO has always slept on a little bit on how much it can drive an ROI.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think the really important part of what you said there was like it's a really low entry level, especially when you're looking at either entering a new market or if you're a new business. Like SEO isn't free, and I think that's something that is often misquoted online. Obviously, you've got a much more direct cost when you're talking about paid media. You've got money in, and then hopefully money comes out of it. But SEO isn't necessarily you putting money in, but ultimately to do it well, you need to invest in it as a channel. And I think that's where a little bit of the performance marketing element sometimes gets a little bit confused, because you can have that tangible ROI with paid media, whereas SEO is a little bit fluffier and a little bit more almost vanity to a certain extent. But certainly if you're creating a new business, if you're a startup, cash is a little bit stricter. You're going to be thinking about that business 100% of the time. As you know, being a founder yourself, like you're thinking about the business consistently, and DIY SEO is probably a way you can kickstart that customer acquisition without initially fronting up a shed load of cash in terms of putting a load of cash into paid media, getting nothing out of it. You may put a load of time into SEO, looking at these tactics, learning about these tactics, and might not get a great deal back from it. But ultimately, at least you've not lost any of that actual kind of cold hard cash.
We talk about it in performance, particularly with paid, but we're always measuring the key metrics, the ROAS, the CAC, the CPA, all of these essential questions which go into understanding, okay, are the tactics and the strategies that we're putting in place, are they actually driving an ROI for the client or for the business themselves? And one of the major equations in that mathematical statement is the media spend. And the fact organic search doesn't have a media spend is one of the elements where it gets slept on a little bit, because as you said, SEO isn't free. You might have to hire an agency, you might have to hire some people in-house in order to do SEO well, or all the software is involved that you need to in order to track it properly and make sure that it's actually working. But you don't have to front up, let's say, a significant amount of budget into, say, a Meta, into, say, a Google, or into even like a DSP or a programmatic supplier or something digital out of home. You don't have to bid for that traffic, which I can guarantee is significantly cheaper than necessarily hiring a few salaries internally or getting an expert agency to come in and actually do it well.
And I think it also depends, doesn't it, in terms of like what industry you're in. Like what industry you're in can vastly impact obviously your CPCs and how much you're actually going to have to put into it. If you're a kind of challenger brand trying to break into, let's for example's sake use something like car insurance, like obviously some of the most competitive keywords you're ever going to target. So being able to come in as a challenger brand in car insurance and compete with the large scale aggregators, like, let's be honest, you're not going to do it. It's just not going to happen. And from an SEO perspective, it's still going to be pretty tricky. But if you start to like pivot your strategy in terms of like not targeting car insurance, for example, I think there's some really interesting challenger brands for young drivers car insurance, or different kind of granular niches, I guess, because they've realized that the difficulty in there is significantly easier. So not only can you try and target that and you actually go from an SEO perspective, but realistically, if you're going to target that from a paid perspective, you're still going to end up wasting a load of cash, because people still aren't going to go with it. People still aren't going to click it. You're still going to be paying for that impression. So yeah, I think it's SEO certainly is easier to kickstart your customer acquisition depending on market, depending on budget. Like you're better off starting there and then seeing where you can scale from, and getting it right initially is really, really important, because if you try and get SEO right later on when you've got it wrong consistently for a good few months, we know it's an absolute nightmare, and that is cleaning up a mess is a lot harder than not making the mess to begin with.
You're exactly right. I mean, yeah, picking up a website after it's been, say, functioning for many years. You know, as a business, especially a digital business, you build so much of your company off that website. You might have certain integrations on how that goes into the stock, how that goes into fulfillment. You've got all of these areas, and actually sometimes those little tiny changes in terms of how that was set up maybe a few years ago can have a massive impact down the line, and particularly on cost as well, because then you might have to go through a website migration, you might have to go through a redesign. It's better to just get it right from the offset.
I think it's so much more than that as well. Like, obviously, from an SEO perspective, you're looking at it and a lot of people from the outside in will look at it and go, oh, it's keywords, it's content, it's backlinks, if we dare to say it. But what it really is, it plays into a lot more than that. You've got technical SEO, which is at the foundation of it all. We always say that building a website without a strong technical foundation is like building a house on quicksand. And it's super cliche and it's super buzzwordy, but ultimately it's completely right. It's completely right. And if you build a website from the ground up with a strong technical foundation, you're not only going to help further SEO positive movements later on down the line, but you're going to help all of the other channels. You're going to help direct, you're going to help any paid traffic and paid acquisition that you try to do. You're going to help referral, you're going to help your email marketing campaigns. It all plays a part. If you've got a really crappy foundation of technical SEO, paid users still aren't going to be able to come on the site and find it. Google's not going to service your ads. People aren't going to be able to navigate their way around the website. So it's almost broadening people's minds in a certain sense and saying SEO is not just content, it's not just words on a page. It's actually making sure you do the right stuff at the right time to make sure, like you're saying, don't have to clean up that mess later on because we've not made it.
Yeah, so true. I mean, I think there's probably a little bit of a stereotype and a stigma from probably SEO maybe 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, really, from how it used to be. But, you know, I think SEO has evolved. I think the SEO, the mindset of someone actually doing SEO has also changed as well. It's not just about keyword stuffing. It's not just about keywords or content. It's about UX. It's about page speed. It's about the quality of what's being written, which is starting to get a bit interesting now with everything in AI. But I also think the algorithm itself is obviously trying to pull it in that way as well. Now, some algos from Google are a bit questionable. I know when this will eventually go live, but we've had a pretty interesting one in the last few days. But there's some really interesting things going on in terms of how SEO has evolved from just being, I guess, the nerds in the corner of the back of the agency, or the guys sitting there who are always sort of arguing with the developers. And essentially just a good SEO performance used to be essentially just a wall of text, which of course it isn't anymore.
And I think that almost takes you slightly full circle as well. Like we started this off by saying SEO isn't free. And I think it's really easy. Like anyone can go on Fiverr, you get spammed, anyone in the industry gets spammed, I'm sure, by LinkedIn SEO experts in their titles trying to sell you backlinks that they don't have, and it's an absolute nightmare. And that gives you that stigma because there's so much kind of waffle in the space, and SEO isn't free and it isn't cheap, but really importantly, it's not cheap and it's not free to do it right. You've got these people that are kind of big brain thinkers that are thinking about the holistic strategy, thinking about Google algorithms, thinking about how the content treats users, thinking about the CRO, thinking about the user journey, thinking about how the technical foundation plays into all of your other acquisition channels. And they're the people that you want to get, and they're not cheap. And that's why you need to make sure that you do your due diligence when you're looking into SEO as a channel, because it can be make or break. Because not only, at least with paid to a certain extent, if you've got someone crap who's doing paid, yes, you're wasting money, but it's not impacting everything else. Whereas if you've got someone that's crap doing SEO, it could break your website, and then it breaks all of your income streams. And paid is like a tap. If it turns off and you've got no other acquisition channels firing, you're in trouble pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think that really leads on nice to the next point why I think SEO is definitely the performance marketing channel, is that longer term sustainable performance element. And you're so right there in terms of, doing SEO well. Evergreen is a bit of a buzzword in the industry because of things change and algorithms change and competitors come in. But normally, if you get a P1 ranking on a high search volume keyword that's relevant, that's exactly relevant to your customer and exactly relevant to the product that you're offering, that is seriously valuable for long-term sales performance. And look, yes, an organic search maybe features below a paid ad, but it will always be there and you don't have to bid for it, which I think is absolutely massive in terms of that performance element. Because I think sometimes in performance marketing, and you know, albeit we are performance marketers, that's what we do, but sometimes you can be so transfixed on the quick win or the quick fix in terms of, yeah, we've got a promo going live, we'll put some creatives together, we'll blast it across the platforms and we'll up our budgets. In that short-term period, you get that ROAS, you bring your customer acquisition down because you've got an offer, but actually your profitability has gone down. And as soon as you take away that media spend from the platform, your performance is back where it was. Whereas if you have that SEO strategy that sort of accompanies it, and that's why I say sometimes, because you've still got to do that. You know, as a brand coming into the UK market, it's so competitive. There's so many different channels and so many different things that you can do, but having that fallback, or not necessarily a fallback, but having that foundation of that consistent SEO revenue that actually grows incrementally year on year, month on month, from doing SEO well and employing the tactics well, you're setting yourself up from, I guess, a cash flow perspective to have that consistent income of customer acquisition and actual sales revenue.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think it's all about having that kind of, again, another buzzword, another terrible buzzword, but it's about that omni-channel approach. Being able to say that you have more than one thing firing, like anyone realistically, if you've got a basic knowledge, can come in, set up those paid campaigns and burn through a load of money. But ultimately, as I said, like if you turn that tap off, all of a sudden you've got nothing left with it. So yeah, it's really important to be able to make sure that you focus on multiple channels, and SEO is one of those channels that it's easier to focus on because you're not pumping that money in, and ultimately that's the crucial part to it. And we keep coming back to it, and it sounds a little bit repetitive, but ultimately it's because it's so true.
We work with a lot of fantastic clients, and we work with a lot of people that have recently come into the UK market actually, and people that have also been here for a long time but are trying to grow. And we see consistently for brands that, you know, we're managing quite a lot of media spend for a few of these clients in particular, but that SEO channel is still contributing that 15 to 25% of revenue every single month. Now, there is a little caveat on that. Obviously, look, branded search is huge in that, in terms of, you know, the more of the upper funnel stuff that you do from a performance marketing perspective, and the more brand awareness you have, and the more brand awareness you have, someone puts, you know, your branded term into Google search and they find you through there. But you know, we see it 15 to 25% of revenue for brands that we manage, putting a lot of media spending still comes from organic search.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The biggest problem is people say that you can't tie SEO back to ROI. And I think to a certain extent that's complete nonsense, because yes, you can improve brand awareness via different channels, whether that's via kind of paid media, whether that you've got a really holistic strategy and you're going via programmatic, via Sky AdSmart, whatever you're doing. And then you're going to get those branded searches. But 9 recurring out of 10, they're going to land on the homepage. But they are going to land on the homepage. And if you've got a really thorough keyword mapping, extensive content strategy, you know what keywords are landing on what pages. And if those pages are the ones that are contributing towards your leads, towards your contact forms, towards your phone calls, towards your revenue, whatever it may be, yes, it's not as absolute as saying this keyword drove this amount of money, but ultimately, you know, if you focused on those categories and those pages for the last 6 months, and in the last 6 months, year over year, they're now up 30, 40, 50, 60%. You can pretty much tie that back to SEO work that has been completed on that. And ultimately, then you tie that towards whatever the agency fee is, whatever it may be. And that's your ROI. It's not as cutthroat as paid is, but ultimately, if you say it can't be done, it's just a bit lazy in my opinion, because it can be done and it absolutely should be done. And ultimately, if you've done your due diligence as an SEO agency, you've done the keyword research, you've mapped it to all the appropriate URLs, you've got your strategy, you've got your roadmap as what URLs you're improving when, you've marked it up and annotated it in GA, or now something different because GA4 you don't have annotations for some bizarre reason, but now you can actually tie it back and you say, we did it on the let's say 14th of November, we're recording it now. We can now look at it the 14th of Jan, and in that time period, it's actually up year on year by 20%, whereas previously it was only flat or is only up by 10%. That extra 10% or that extra 20% has come from somewhere, and that work you've done on that URL is a pretty good bet that that's where it's come from.
But the important thing is, Sam, and we know this, we bang on about it all the time, it's that intent piece, you know, it's that capability to be able to optimize a website for keywords that are actually going to drive value.
Yeah, that's the biggest issue is the intent piece right now, because it used to be what's the user looking for. It's now what's the user looking for, what does Google think the user's looking for. It's trying to guess what the user wants. It's trying to guess what kind of content it should provide to the user. And ultimately, if you're treating it as if this is a transactional query, but Google is treating it as, I think a user wants to know more information about it, if you're trying to target that query with a commercial page, you ain't going to get anywhere. So you need to really be mindful of intent in that example, because you're battling on so many different fronts that you need to be able to make sure that you're kind of giving the user and giving the search engine what they want, because that's the only way that you're going to be shown. And I think that's what's really important, the crux of not only SEO, but that's also down to paid media as well. Because if you're trying to service ads for what you consider a commercial keyword on a commercial landing page, but ultimately anyone in the SERP is actually only looking for information, people probably aren't going to click it. And there's also that like kind of demographic issue. And I guess we look at SERPs and the results page really different, because we're marketers. I've been doing this for like over 10 years now. So I look at it in a really incredibly cynical way. If I ever search anything, I'll look at it and go, either I want to cost that business money, so I'm going to click the ad, or I don't want to contribute, so I'm going to skip it and go to an organic result. I search in such a like marketeer's way. And then sometimes I watch how my wife searches, and I'm just like, this is absolutely insane. Like, you can see how it's something ridiculous, like 40% of searches have never been searched for. And that's just like as a small example in my own house. So think about that multiplied by people that don't know anyone that works in marketing, and people that are of an older demographic that aren't as familiar with the AI technologies, even don't trust the ads, don't trust shopping, whatever it may be. You're still fighting that battle. That's why you need to have such a presence across all of your channels, because some people don't trust paid, some people don't trust SEO. Google doesn't trust SEO enough to put you there if your name's not Reddit or your name's not Amazon. So you need to be able to make sure that you're doing the lot.
It's looking at actual numbers from not just industry averages, but also the clients that we work with consistently. You know, that not doing SEO from a performance angle, and everything that we talk about in performance marketing always comes back down to that CAC. It always comes back down to that ROAS and the ROI that we're generating on the marketing spend that we've got. There's 15 to 25% of revenue there that you are potentially leaving on the table for zero media spend. And I think that's where SEO maybe gets slightly overlooked, because it can almost be like a targeted blanket, sort of just by being able to rank for a particular set of keywords that have that intent, that are relevant to what you're selling. You can actually capture a lot more people than I think people maybe give it credit for.
Yeah, definitely. And SEO also plays that part in kind of, that's why as an agency, we like to obviously manage both, because if you manage both, you've got everything at your disposal and you make them work in tandem. Because you may have instances where you've got a paid approach, for example, where the CPCs are incredibly expensive, but actually organic keyword difficulty it actually isn't that high. So you may put a load of effort into that, because why would you waste your budget bidding on something extremely expensive when actually to rank there organically, it's not going to take you a great deal of effort. And kind of vice versa. Maybe you save all of your budget for branded campaigns because you know brand converts really well, and you know there's really aggressive competitors that are also bidding on your brand, but that doesn't leave you enough media spend or enough money to be able to target non-brand generics or to target anything else in the market, really. So you let your SEO strategy do that and kind of compete on those fronts, while you actually almost defend your territory and defend your brand. People will jump ship if they search for your brand and then a competitor comes up and goes, oh, 20% off, they're going to click on that, because why wouldn't you? Like, everyone wants to save money. So you need to be able to make sure that you're using both of those together, and being able to bolster your paid efforts with SEO and vice versa means that means that you can kind of have that kind of more aligned strategy.
It helps both channels significantly, and not necessarily just both channels from a PPC or an organic search, but all of it. I think sometimes where maybe SEO is slightly underrated in the performance marketing space is their ability to analyze data and their capability to be data literate. And I think that lends its hand to, I mean, it's definitely helped us in our agency growth coming from that SEO background and then sort of transitioning into performance. We've really been able to take those skills that we've learned from being able to analyze data and take that into the performance measurement, and vice versa. We've also learned a lot from the performance guys. But yeah, having them work in tandem in terms of what we see, particularly with brands who maybe have had success in Europe or have had success in North America, who are then thinking about, okay, we want to expand to the UK. Our recommendation always would be to make sure that you consider that SEO element. At least consider it, because, you know, like you say, you can get a few years down the line and you're heavily reliant on these platforms. You're a victim to potentially a guideline change or a policy change, which can then literally completely lose your visibility overnight. But I don't know, well, unless you had a crazy algorithm update, which who knows what's going to happen with the search engines over the next few years with all the developments in AI. But that organic search element, as long as you're sort of consistent with it and you're constantly on top of it, you're always going to have that baseline level of revenue without having to chuck the spend into the platform, which is a fantastic model to build your brand off.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's why it's so attractive to have both of them. And I think there's still quite a big hangover with SEO in the sense of time it takes to action as well, because I think a lot of what attracts people to paid media is reasonably instant. It's not instant, but it's way more instant than specifically SEO used to be. And I think SEO now has changed. The algo's changed, better or worse. But ultimately, we used to talk about it would take 6 months to get a page indexed and get a page ranking. It's absolutely not true now. If your agency is still telling you that, they're absolutely lying to you, because we see it across a multitude of clients that we can now launch a page. It can be ranking on the top page within a month or two. It's now drastically reduced the amount of time it actually takes to do that. And I think there's still that hangover, and there's still almost SEO, there's a little bit of gatekeeping in the community that people don't want to overpromise, and people will still say and still bring out this 6-month tagline because it covers them. It's like, oh, let's sell them into a 6-month contract because then we don't have to worry about it for 6 months. But if you do it, if you believe in yourself, and if you know that what you do works, say it. There's no problem saying it. Like, we're going to get you results in 2 months, and you'll be able to show that. And if you're doing it well, you will get results in 2 months. And that again goes back to get it done right and get it done well. It's not free and it's not cheap, because there'll be a whole host of agencies, a whole host of freelancers out there that will be towing the 6 to 8 month line, even longer potentially. But do it, put your colors to the mast and just say it's going to take significantly short because the algos change, and have confidence in your ability to be able to do that. But SEO as a channel, it still has that massive hangover of it takes ages to action. So people don't want to invest in it. So why does anyone want to pay a 2, 3, 4, 5 grand a month SEO retainer or whatever it may be you may be paying to maybe potentially see some return in 6 months? Unfortunately for us, that isn't the case anymore, and we're quite happy to commit to that and say it's not the case, because we can see performance quicker, and then ultimately it makes those conversations in 6 months time 10 times easier. Because like, look, we've been having performance for 3 or 4 months, rather than get to 6 months and go, oh yeah, we're pretty sure it's going to come at some point. Well, no, it's actually come, and you're seeing return on your investment.
Yeah, I agree, and I think in the industry as well, where some people perhaps maybe don't give SEO the credit, is that I think people are very scared to project it as well, which is very much kind of from the angle that you're coming from, because people do have this kind of subconscious belief, I suppose, that it takes so long to, well, not subconscious, because it used to be the case, but
yeah,
but you know, it has adapted. Things are quicker now, and we, you know, having that performance angle as well within our business and the plethora of the services that we offer, we do project SEO. And we can get pretty close to it as well, because you know, you've got your rankings, you understand how much potential search volume there is for that. You can apply a CTR model to that data. You can put a conversion rate on that amount of traffic that you're coming to, as long as you're backing that it's relevant and that it's got that user intent, you know that it's gonna, and then off the bat, you can have the back end metrics in terms of what's the average order value, particularly for organic search if the brand is already doing it, but just in general, and then you can actually start to project some revenue from that. And yeah, that's normally the cherry on the top of the pitch when we put that at the end, and we can actually show, okay, look, a lot of people often come to us for performance marketing. They want ads, they want channels to go live, but we will always, 9 times out of 10, put that SEO piece in front of them with that projection. And yeah, it always turns heads in the room, I think, when we put that on, because I don't think many people actually project SEO, but it can be done.
Yeah, absolutely. It can be done. And like you said, like it's changed so much that there's so much more data at our disposal to make these projections more accurate. Like, at the end of the day, they're projections. Like you can never guess what's going to happen in the next 6 months, whether that's wider factors like the economy, or whether that's kind of more internal factors like an algorithm change that completely changes intent. So like there's always a caveat, there's always a pinch of salt, but as with anything. So you need to be confident on your ideals and understand that you can drive SEO performance. And I think you're absolutely right. That's what turns heads when you stand there and you confidently say that we think we can achieve X, Y, and Z within the next 4 months. It gets people talking and making sure that you're looking at that from seasonal trends, and you look back at the data that you have at your disposal and understand how seasonal trends and peaks and troughs affect the particular industry or the particular business that you're pitching to. And then you can go in there with as much data as you have, confidently say, I think we're going to move on average rank this many to these many positions, and that's going to drive in the region of this much. And it's even more impactful in 6 months' time when you're pretty much in the region of it actually happening.
One other point that I want to mention in terms of the performance marketing angle, I guess, and I think this is where we're starting to see search engines and performance starting to combine, is on different platforms. Not every single user necessarily uses Google as a search engine. You've got that TikTok element now, where people are using TikTok as a search engine and finding organic content through there. But in order for the content to necessarily rank and perform well, the creative needs to be good. And we have that conversation a lot within performance marketing, that we can chuck as much budget as we want at these platforms. We can chuck as much budget as we want at, say, a digital out of home, a program, a meta for brand awareness. But ultimately, if that creative isn't good enough, then it doesn't cut through. It doesn't necessarily resonate with the audience. I suppose just as a little bit of a side point away from Google, but I think TikTok's starting to show that sort of amalgamation in a little bit more detail.
TikTok's it's a really interesting one, because ultimately you almost have to cut through the noise, as you said, super quick. Like, by the nature of the platform, people are scrolling and they're scrolling. If you don't engage them within the first few seconds, they're gone, and the algorithm's never going to show that again, especially from an organic perspective. So yeah, cutting through the noise, having those really clear cut, like crystal clear creatives that are engaging, that are resonating with what the audience wants to see, with whatever your target user wants to see, is super important when it comes to that. And I think that's the visual element that traditional search engines like your Google, like Bing almost as well, they've not caught up with that element of people almost want to see. And I think that's what they're almost trying to do with the AI integration and things like that, is try and make it a little bit more succinct and try and answer people's questions within the SERP by saying, look, you don't even have to click through to websites, just read the first 1/8 of the screen and we've answered your question. And I think that's very much come from the rise of things like TikTok, kind of answering people's questions pretty rapidly. And the algorithm is very good, and it will show you really good, highly relatable stuff. So Google had to adapt to that, and traditional search engines had to adapt to that. And they're like, how do we bring people back onto a platform? What do people do that are searching on TikTok and get an answer within a few videos? They don't want to be scrolling and reading pages and pages and pages of text to find an answer. And that's where this algo shift's come from. I do appreciate it's really hard for Google to understand this is what people want, but also they're doing a really naff job of it. So that something needs to get better in the immediate term, because almost your traditional copy and your traditional text is dying a death, purely on the basis that Google can't really get an understanding of how to integrate this shorter attention span almost and creative elements into the SERP. If that comes along, I think that grabs people and almost navigates them into the website. And then that's when people will engage with your content a lot more. But at the moment, the SERP's such a mess that no one knows and no one wants to be in it. So that's why there's even more of a rise of zero-click searches. Not because people are finding the answers in the SERP, but because people can't be bothered to go any further because it's such a mess when you search something. Like, they don't know where to look. Do you look at the map pack? Do you look at the Google Shopping? Do you look at the SERP features? Do you look at the AI result? Do you look at the organic? Do you look at the phone number? Do you look at like the random 7 blocks of images it's chucked at you? Like, no one knows. I don't know, and I'm a marketer. Like, so how is anyone else going to know?
No, it is. You're right. You're right about that TikTok piece. And you know, it's a growing platform. I mean, look, we still work with clients on both TikTok and Google now. We still definitely, from a conversion perspective, we still see that sort of those kind of traditional channels are still very much the main revenue contributors. But it ultimately depends on the business and the audience. But where I think TikTok is maybe slightly overlooked is that kind of more upper funnel kind of awareness element. That actually sometimes your first interaction with a brand is maybe better on somewhere like a TikTok, whether that's a UGC review, whether it's someone actually using the product, whether it's an influencer of a particular niche that you're trying to target is shouting about how good it is. 9 times out of 10, they'll either, you know, they're probably going to end up going to a search engine to find the brand and convert, which is where you need that visibility in order to capture that sale.
Yeah, definitely. And that's the point of trying to not only bringing all your channels together, but it's bringing all your platforms together as well. If you're looking for the top 10 best places to eat in London, do you want to read a 1,000-word guide, or do you want to see someone rattling around it with loads of pictures and interactive elements of the food that you can eat and the drinks that you can have and the views that you can see? Probably the latter. And it has changed, and that's kind of the thing that people need to pivot with. And if that's your upper funnel, getting people in, answering questions at a really top level to introduce people into a brand, then people are going to be more engaged with you and potentially search you. And then that's when they come back via a branded search and either click on an ad because you're defending what you own, or your organic ad because they don't trust the ads. So it's about making sure you improve your visibility and improve your footprint by brand awareness.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess to bring it into summary, and I'll have to credit the source. It'll be somewhere written down below the video. I'll have to credit the source exactly, but this was a pretty amazing survey. Granted, it might be a little bit outdated now, back in 2022, but the graphic will be somewhere down below. But it says, what are the 3 most important metrics that you are currently using to track and optimize your e-commerce? Right, and it gave them the option to select 3. The 3 main outliers, and this is where I think bringing it back to, I think particularly SEO, is revenue being one of them, which makes sense. Sales conversion rate being the other, which also makes sense. And then sales volume. So those are the top 3 from e-commerce brands of this survey put out by I'll have to find the source. But taking it back to performance, right? Those 3 elements, revenue, sales conversion rate, and sales volume. Every single one of those is 100% in its entirety relevant to organic search, relevant to SEO. In terms of, you know, if you've got your site in the right areas on the web, it's for the right audience and you're getting the right non-branded and branded traffic coming in, you're going to increase your revenue. If the intent is good and you're doing the SEO tactics properly and you're making sure that you bring in the right user onto the site, your conversion rate will go up. It just will. And then also your volume will go up as well, because the more search volume opportunities that you're ranking for, the more traffic that you bring into the site, the more sales you're going to make. Bringing it back to that sort of performance marketing angle, for me, it's baffling why SEO doesn't necessarily get the flowers it deserves for being a performance channel.
Yeah, exactly. I think all of it's super, super relevant to the fact of why SEO is so powerful, and not only by itself, but when it's interconnected as well. And I think by having that survey and those statistics behind it, and ultimately you can do as many surveys as you want, but ultimately a business wants to make money. How can you acquire money? You can do it by activating acquisition channels correctly, efficiently, and profitably. And organic search is arguably the most efficient at doing that. You can't clearly, and agencies and freelancers and people in the industry will not clearly commit to being able to provide an accurate ROI. And whether those senior stakeholders believe in the ROI once you do try and kind of claim that is also up for debate, because I think that's a big part to it. I think there's a lot of good people in the industry. There's loads of good agencies. There's loads of good freelancers out there that probably do very similar to what we do in terms of projections, forecasting, tying it back to keywords and categories and URLs that have made money and tying that back to ROI. But ultimately, we need to shift internally and the viewpoint of SEO internally in-house to be able to say, we make you money on these URLs and by activating this as a channel. Yes, you've not put £10 in and got £50 out, and you can't see that as clearly as you can via paid, but actually what's happened is we've created long-term sustainable growth, which is almost at a certain element passive, because it's not passive because you do still put work into it, but you can get to a certain point where you need to put in a load of grunt work up front and you need to make sure that everything works, but then you can kind of get into a BAU, ticking along, doing all of the basics, doing them really, really well. And that's when you get into the point of that it's actually really low maintenance. So yes, you may need to put more in up front, but you should get to a point where you can basically tick along. It can be your, as you say, kind of 15-20% revenue every single month coming through organic search, and you're not putting any money in for that, or you're putting minimal amount of kind of an agency fee into that.
I completely agree. Doesn't necessarily understand the value of SEO. He has a little bit more insight in terms of why it absolutely is a performance marketing channel. And albeit we are biased, but I would say it's one of the best, particularly for the points that Sam was making there. You know, that long-term sustainable growth, the profitability element, because you're not chucking all that spend in, and then like it can be relatively passive. And once you get to that level, then the ability to sort of do budgets, project the sales for next year, you've always got that base.
Yeah, exactly. And look, it's not cheap, it's not free, but ultimately it can be bloody effective.